try that again. Good evening.
Good evening.
I always like to hear from the choir. I want to welcome you to a very special event. My name, if you don't know me, is Larry Talbert. I am the founder and CEO of Radian Partners. Why you are here tonight is the fulfillment of something I've been dreaming about for a long time. As a matter of fact, when you come into our office, we're so bold as that we put it on our door, and it says Radian Partners. It's more than numbers. We get paid to manage and grow your wealth, but that's not really what excites us. What excites us is sharing information about how to help you live longer, healthier, more fulfilled lives. And tonight may be the apex of that, because I'm going to shortly introduce you to the healer that helped me do just that. In 2005, December, I had 2 heart attacks. Dose. One wasn't enough, so I had 2. That was followed by a quadruple bypass, December 21st. After my surgery, I had a gifted surgeon. He said, "You know, Larry, you're good to go." My cardiologist said, "You're going to rehab for a couple of weeks. You'll be good to go." Neither of those physicians said that I had raging artery disease. Neither of those physicians told me that I was diabetic. They mentioned high blood pressure, put me on a medication, which was actually not really good for me. And then they said, "Go out and play." A few years later, I took their advice, did nothing. Now I have a stent. One day at lunch, I was complaining about the health treatment system that we have in the United States to a good friend of mine. And he said, "I can help you fix that. You need to meet my friend, Dr. Wright." So I was like, okay, another doctor. So I went, and our first meeting together, we spent about 2.5 hours together. And I walked out feeling so refreshed and so revived and thinking, that's going to cost me a fortune. I just spent 2.5 hours with the doctor. That's because he spent 2.5 hours asking me questions about me, about what I wanted to accomplish. What was my health goals? What was my background? He wanted to see my drugs. In other words, it wasn't just diagnose and treat. It was diagnose and reverse. I'm convinced that I'm standing here tonight due to Dr. Wright. He helped engineer the plan that reversed my raging artery disease so that I have never yet had number 3. He diagnosed correctly several years ago that I had the flu, SARS, whatever it was before COVID, which led to systemic infection, which led to urinary tract infection, which led to rigor, which made me think I was having another heart attack. After 2 lung physicians, he was the only physician that diagnosed that correct. Now, I could have passed away from that event. So that's the second time he has saved my life. So I want you to do 2 favors for me tonight. First, as you listen intently. Listen with curiosity. And when he goes through the methodology and the science he's going to share, ask yourself this question. Am I worth that? Or am I going to settle for 5 minutes with a cardiologist once a year who tells me that I'm in range? I've never been one to accept in range. Next, in a couple of days, Wahid will have a surprise gift for you. We want you to share that with everybody you know, because the information that you will get here tonight may do 2 things. It may help you live a longer, healthier, more satisfying life. It may let you opt out of having a coronary event. If you share this information, which I do routinely for Dr. Wright, it may help you save one of your friends' lives and help them live a longer, healthier, more happy life. Is that a deal? All right, make note. Thank you. August the 13th at 6 o'clock. We want you to be in the same bat time, same bat channel, same bat location. Eric Case is coming back to give our annual economic update. You'll want to reserve your seat because Eric usually sells the house out. That's his third time coming. There's no better economist that can match charts and graphs with humor like he can. So, I want to tell you a little fact about Dr. Wright before he steps up. In order to be a successful doctor in the healthcare system, in other words, you make the hospital where you work or you're employed, you must help them make money. One of the things I learned from his wife, who is like me, is an unabashed bragger about Dr. Wright, is that the average patient admitted from his care was 18 years older than the average patient admitted from other physicians. And on whole, was a lot healthier. That's not a physician the healthcare system can make money from. That's when he went concierge. So, Dr. Wright, I don't know how better to introduce you other than that. Thank you.
Great to see an audience that is filling this room. That's awesome. And I'm sure part of it was the title of the talk. How many of you know somebody that's had a heart attack already? How about a stroke? How about diabetes? It is epidemic. Those diseases are epidemic. They are not just diseases of aging. They're diseases with specific causes. And once you know the cause, you can prevent it. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'll let you read one of my heroes in elementary school. That was the first autobiography I read, was Thomas Edison. And he was a visionary in more ways than the light bulb and other things that we already know about. The only thing I would change about his statement is that the doctor of the future will give only the exactly right medicine for the exactly right reason and the exactly right dose. Everything else he says is 100% true right now today. The other thing is, have any of you seen Dr. Sanjay Gupta's, either of his specials on CNN several years ago, one called The Last Heart Attack, and just this year, The End of Alzheimer's? If you haven't seen them, please go on YouTube. He did his homework. He will let you know that, yes, this is real. It's not just fantasy. It's not just a wish. Larry alluded to some of this, but let's, first of all, anything that I say, I don't want to be critical of your physician or the healthcare system. There are some realities and some constraints to the way that your physician and others can practice. I don't have enough time to go into all of that today, but here's what I will tell you. Day one of medical school, I started learning how to recognize what a disease was and what to do about it. First day, this wasn't even a class, this was a parade of patients from the different specialties that had these amazingly odd diseases that I'd never heard of. I mean, I'm just new in medical school, right? Well, the whole medical training system, the whole healthcare system, is really a disease detection and management system. Now, that's great if I'm in a car accident and I want the best docs down at the med fixing me. But chronic conditions, and you'll learn why that is today, chronic conditions don't lend themselves to this snap answer. Take this pill and you'll get better, and I'll see you in the morning, so to speak. So the healthcare system is really a disease care system. It's misnamed. And so it's wait for sickness and then treat it. Well, I'm in the health creation business because that is find what's ahead for my patients, help them to know what to do differently to change their course. The Titanic, over 100 years ago, thought it was unsinkable, right? I mean, it was billed as the unsinkable liner. The captain thought it was unsinkable. They knew that they were heading into an ice field. And in fact, they got at least 5 different radio warnings saying, you better change course. Well, what happened when he didn't change course? Tonight is your chance to change course, to start a change in something, and we're going to talk about that. So let me tell you a little more about how did I even get to this point in my career. So I'm an internal medicine physician, trained here in Memphis. In fact, 45 years ago this month, my wife and I and our 4 children moved to Memphis for residency at the Baptist Hospital downtown, the big 19-story hospital that used to be downtown. That was 45 years ago this month. I didn't know very much that day. Medical school teaches you lots of facts, but it doesn't teach you how to treat a patient. So I'm all eyes and ears, and I tell that to tell this story. About a month and a half, 2 months into my residency, I get the phone call from my mom that Dad's in an ambulance in Florida, headed to the hospital because they're pretty sure he's having a heart attack. That's 1979. And I knew even if he was in Memphis, Tennessee that night, he had a 50-50 chance of surviving it. If he survived it, he had a 50-50 chance of having a normal quality of life afterwards. That's how grim heart disease was in 1979. We didn't have a lot of the fancy stuff. So I knew, regardless of where he was, that, it was a coin toss. Now, thankfully, he did well. He was diagnosed diabetic as a result of that, and we'll get to that tonight a little bit. But then I realized, you know what? I remember his dad at 50 had to stop working because he had had a heart attack. So I was smart enough, at least as an intern, okay, Grandpa had one, Dad had one, maybe I'm headed that way. And so I've been very interested in this all along. So that's just a little bit about my story. In fact, that's Dad. That's their 50th anniversary picture. So he was 52 at that time. He made it to 74, died of non-cardiac stuff, but that's part of the story. Well, because of what I've learned, one of my sons, who's in this picture with his family, at age 34, we did a test that can tell you how old your arteries are. At 34, and he's an exercise science major, exercises, eats right, doesn't smoke, he lives a healthy life, what everybody would agree. At age 34, he had the arteries of a 57-year-old. Let that sink in. His wife was pretty much devastated when she heard that. It's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And my son said, well, can we do anything about it? Why did this happen? I said, well, the reason it happened is you picked the wrong parents. Because there's a lot of heart disease in our families. And I have 5 of the 6 genes that we test for. My dad, we didn't have those tests back then, but I'm sure he had those. My son has those. I tell that story because genetics aren't destiny. They're predictive, but they aren't destiny. So let's move a little bit more forward on the story. What you didn't hear today on your news feeds, on your cell phones, or the scroll at the bottom of any of the TV channels, what you didn't hear is that as of 8 o'clock this morning, the equivalent of 1 Airbus of people was taken to their death due to cardiovascular disease in the United States. A little over an hour ago, the second plane took another plane full of people to their death. And by midnight tonight, the third plane. Every day of the week, 365 days a year. It is still the #1 cause of death in our country. The only year it wasn't was the influenza epidemic in 1918. That's the only time. COVID tried to knock heart disease off the top of it, but even COVID didn't do that. Well, in my internship and residency, I learned all these wonderful things to do, and I implemented those, and after several years in practice, I was not satisfied with my outcomes. I just wasn't satisfied. People were still having heart attacks. They were becoming diabetic. And then I had a 40-year-old radiologist, he and I were the same age at the time, who said, you know, I've got a family history of heart disease. Will you make sure I'm okay? So this is 30 years ago. Put him on a stress test. He passes it with flying colors. His cholesterol's fine. His blood pressure's fine. His blood sugar is fine. I pronounced him, it looks like you've escaped. You don't have any of the things that, and you did great on the treadmill. 3 months later, I get the call from the emergency room, Dr. So-and-so, we're not sure he's going to live. They brought him in with a heart attack. His blood pressure's so low, we're not sure anything's, that we're going to be able to save his life. At some point, you have to ask yourself tough questions, right? The tough question was, what did I miss? I looked back in his chart, like I didn't miss anything. Everything was fine. Then about 6 months after that, he did survive, by the way. He is still alive, and he still sees me. Thankfully, the science has gotten better in 30 years. The other thing is a nurse asked me to see her dad, same reason, about the same time frame. Put him on the stress test, his cholesterol, again, everything normal. 6 months later, he's in the ER. We had nobody knew why those men had their heart attacks 30 years ago, but they sure did. Well, you're going to learn tonight where that science has gone over the last 30 plus years, and how does it apply to you? Here again, here's how common it is. Princess Leia, the actress who played Princess Leia, died on a real airplane, had a sudden death event on a real airplane several years ago. She survived long enough to get to an ICU, but died there from a heart attack. Tim Russert, news reporter, Sunday morning. A lot of you may have used to watch him. His doctors knew he had heart disease. They did a stress test every year. He was on all the right medicines. On a Sunday, he's getting ready to do his show. He clutches his chest, collapses, and dies in the hallways of the studio. And his cardiologist rightly said, we don't know why that happened. He passed his stress test, etc. None other than the president of the American Heart Association a few years ago, at age 52, you see a theme here? 50s is an important age to get to, is getting ready to do the keynote speech at the American Heart Association, did his exercise, his training that morning down in the hotel, gym, gets back to the room, is getting ready to shower and get ready for his talk, and collapses and has died. Thankfully, one of the hotel workers knew where the defibrillator was, and they saved his life at age 52. If it can happen to the president of the American Heart Association, that tells you that there's some work to do, right? There's missing information. The other thing I want to tell you about the healthcare system is there are a lot of things that constrain us in the insurance-based system. One of which is something called the guidelines. The guidelines are what the expert committees, they look at the science and they say, based upon what's been published, if you have this condition, do these things. If you have this condition, do these things. Well, by the time a committee can decide what those recommendations are, the science is outdated, honestly, because science moves pretty fast. And have you ever tried to get 12 people that have pretty good egos to agree on any one thing? So a lot of compromise, right? I mean, this is just the reality. I'm not throwing stones. This is just the way it is. The guidelines are actually the least I should ever do for a patient. The least. Because if you don't meet that standard of care, you can get sued. It's not the most we should do for any one patient. And guess what? Everybody in this room is unique. Even if there were identical twins, I always have to look around the audience to make sure there aren't any. But even if there had been, I would say, you two are not identical. You just aren't. You may look alike, but you're certainly not identical. The average American has one healthy birthday after age 65. Think about that. One. And the average American only lives 13 years after their 65th birthday. 78 is pretty much the average. That candle that's burning, we're going to talk about something called oxidative stress. That's a word you may not have ever heard. You're going to hear some words tonight you may not have ever heard, but we're going to try to explain what they mean and why is David Wright talking about that to a community group. Oxidative stress is what makes steel rust. It's what gets out of the smokestacks when you burn fuel and so forth. It damages things. Guess what? Our cells are made out of tiny machines. Hundreds of little machines are inside of each and every cell in your body. And if those machines are not optimally working, then the cell isn't going to optimally work, and all of a sudden things go haywire. So we're going to talk a lot about oxidative stress, why it causes damage, how do you know if you might be at risk for that oxidative stress. So this idea that a healthy cell is functioning and doing everything that it's supposed to do, but if those machines start to misbehave, we call that dysfunction. Now, the person feels fine at this point. It's imperceptible. There's no blood test that tells you that. And most of the time it gets blamed, aging is what gets blamed on that change. Well, the truth is we are all going to age. I cannot reverse anybody's aging, but I can slow down how fast people age. Well, when cells start to misbehave, all of these things happen. Not just shorter lives, but shorter health spans. Larry talked about living healthy and enjoying life. Well, that 13 years of declining health doesn't sound like something you want to sign up for. It doesn't. And yet the average person has, quote, signed up for 13 years of declining health at the end of their life. Arterial disease, which we're going to spend a lot of time on tonight because that's the number one killer. But guess what? Dementia and diabetes are related to this. So if we can address oxidative stress, here's the key takeaway. If we can address oxidative stress, we can halt this natural sequence. So this is an audience participation question, and if you're one of my patients, if you happen to be, you cannot answer this question. Because if you answered it wrong, then I'd be, embarrassed that I didn't teach you right. What's the single thing responsible for almost all heart attacks and strokes?
Diet or stress?
I love those answers, diet and stress, and you're going to learn about both of those, so those are great answers. Such as?
Hitting every bar every night. Are you going to bed at a decent hour? Are you burning the midnight oil?
I love it.
Are you exercising? Are you eating properly?
I love that answer. That's part of it, but it's only part of it. Because I told you about my son's healthy lifestyle. And yeah, I told you about his genetics too, and we'll come back to that. Any other reason? These are great answers, trust me. We'll get back to those. Any other thoughts? Inflammation. This is the unifying theme. Everything that these gentlemen talked about are drivers of either increased inflammation or decreased inflammation. In fact, what we put into our bodies, and I'm going to include the air we breathe and the toxic environment of people that we live in, anything that comes into our body has the potential to either be harmful to us or generate health. If you eat the right things, you'll get healthier. If you eat the wrong things, you'll get unhealthier. So inflammation, I just made it sound like the ultimate bad guy, but guess what? Inflammation is the first step towards healing anything. Whenever you cut yourself, what happens? It gets red and puffy and swollen, right? That's inflammation. And that's designed to heal whatever just got injured. The problem is, if we don't stop what's causing the damage in the first place, the inflammation can never lead to healing. It can never resolve. In fact, it just gets worse and worse and actually adds to the damage that's already there. So most of these, quote, diseases of aging are tied to this. How do we treat inflammation? Well, you may have read some headlines in the last couple of years about different drugs that have been approved for inflammation, and they have a role. There have been a couple of them announced in the last few years. But I can promise you there will never be a pharmaceutical solution. It may be part of the solution, but it is not going to answer all of the reasons that people have these diseases. Because you have to find out the root causes. And these gentlemen have mentioned a few of those root causes. I talked about my son and his arteries. Well, this gentleman, several hundred years ago, made the very prescient statement that a man is as old as his arteries. Now, they had only learned about arteries a few decades before this gentleman made that statement. And guess what? It took until about the last 25 years for any of us from a science standpoint to understand why those heart attacks that I mentioned earlier, why did they happen? We now know why. It's not a mystery. This picture shows the large arteries in the body. Anybody, again, if you're my patient, you can't guess. How many miles of artery do we have in our body? Somebody throw out a number. There's no wrong answers. Come on. 10, 50. I'm an auctioneer. Do I hear higher? Come on, somebody's got to say more than 50.
1,000.
Anybody want to go more than 1,000?
60.
This man's read some books. 60,000 miles of artery. 60,000. Now, the majority of those are as small as a human hair. They're itty bitty. But I call them a highway because that highway is carrying goods and services around the body from point A to point B so that cells can do what they do. They need oxygen, they need glucose, they need hormones, they need all these things to function. There's only one way for them to get there. It ain't magic. It's a highway. If the highway's healthy, then we've got a chance. If the highway's not healthy, you have no chance. I told somebody that's in a longevity group recently, well, you know what? You can't have longevity if you've had a heart attack. Because he wasn't doing anything about his heart. He was doing all these supplements and all sorts of things. The leading cause of death in our country, and this was a 20-year study that was published about 10 years ago, and it hadn't changed, is what we eat, how much we move, and how much we weigh are three of the top 5. Cholesterol ain't on there, blood sugar ain't on there, in those tops ones. Smoking is number 2. When the study came out, I was like, wait a minute, I thought smoking was really bad for you. It is really bad for you, but only 20% of people smoke. So it's killing those folks off, but the other 80%, smoking has nothing to do with it. You can see blood pressure, glucose, cholesterol's all the way down at number 7. So with some of those background facts, let's talk a little bit more about aging. Aging, one of the best definitions is this loss of resilience. Think about, I'm as old as most of the room, okay? I'm older than some of the room. But I know that I'm not as resilient in some things. If I get a head cold, it takes a little bit longer. to get better. It takes longer to get up off the floor. And I run half marathons, and it still gets hard to get up off the floor sometimes. So this loss of resilience is because of this gradual deterioration. If the cells aren't healthy, how can the body possibly be healthy? And I talked about these tiny machines, and we're not going to do a science lesson on what's inside of a cell, but all of those colorful structures are inside of every single cell, and those are machines that have to do what they're intended to do. So I've already spilled the beans that the true cause of heart disease is this thing called oxidative stress, because it leads to inflammation. And I'm going to leave this slide up for a little bit. You'll be able to watch this later, as Larry mentioned, but you may want to jot down what are some of these things that cause oxidative stress. Well, sleep apnea, and even how much you sleep, what your quality of sleep is. All sorts of inflammatory diseases, like even psoriasis, is a driver of oxidative stress. Infections, gum disease. Cholesterol, yes, is a part of it, and I'm not going to talk about each of these, but something called insulin resistance is probably present in 70% of this room. Whether you know it or not, you have this thing called insulin resistance that will lead to diabetes if you're not already diabetic, and absolutely is trashing your arteries, whether you know that or not. Air pollution, emotional stress, something as simple as low vitamin D, gut health. There are some others, but I think you can see that if I just pick one condition to treat, if I focus on just blood pressure, how can I possibly prevent the other things that are going on in someone? This is a busy slide, but what I've listed on the left-hand side are the different daily choices that can impact your health one way or the other. And I intentionally put nutrition at the top because, to that gentleman's comment about what you eat, nutrition is the single most important thing, because you do it a couple of times a day, 2 or 3 times a day. And so what am I putting in my mouth is huge. And on the other side are the things that we test for. Inflammation and insulin resistance and all sorts of things. And here's how they're interrelated. It's not simple. I think you can see why, if all I do is help somebody eat a healthy diet and ignore the other things, I've not stopped anything. You have to address every single one of these issues. And guess what? Again, if you're all unique, you're going to have unique issues. There will never be one size fits all nutrition plan, exercise plan, sleep plan, supplement plan. I can go on and on. There is not a magic answer, but there is an answer for each person that's magical when you see it in action. Let's talk. I'm going to take you on maybe deeper dive than you want on science. So here's an artery that we've cut in half. We've cut the highway open. That channel is what's carrying the bloodstream. It's carrying glucose and potassium and sodium and cholesterol and all sorts of things, because every cell in your body needs those things 24/7. And guess what? In a healthy person, cholesterol goes into each cell. The cell takes the cholesterol it needs, and then it goes to the next cell and the next cell and the next cell. It goes right through the artery. Period. In a healthy artery. I don't care how high your cholesterol is. What I do care about is, do you have oxidative stress? Because once oxidative stress happens, the whole shooting match changes. Oxidative stress, I told you, changes the way cells behave. Well, that middle layer of cells that's right underneath that black line, those cells suddenly start making a sticky substance that traps cholesterol. If you don't make the sticky stuff, you ain't trapping cholesterol. Period. If you are making the sticky stuff, getting your cholesterol down as low as possible isn't going to stop it from being trapped. It'll just trap slower. I'm not saying you don't worry about cholesterol, but the key is you got to stop trapping it. Well, once you start trapping it, then it builds up right underneath the roadway. And think of a real road that has potholes. And those potholes are scattered, right? They're not, the road isn't an entire pothole, certain intersections and so forth. So our arteries are the same way. This is sporadic. It's distributed throughout the body. But once that cholesterol gets trapped, it becomes toxic. A chemical that's supposed to keep us alive becomes toxic because it gets oxidized. It gets corrupted. And what does the body do when it's getting damaged? Inflammation. Inflammation's trying to heal this. It's trying to come in and get rid of that cholesterol. It's trying to kill the cholesterol, literally, like as if it were a bacteria, as if it were an infection. There's nothing to kill. The problem is you end up killing your own cells that are around it. So now we get this accelerated damage. Oxidative stress starts it. Now the inflammation is adding to it, and now we've got a snowball going downhill, gaining lots of energy. This takes decades. My son, who had 57-year-old arteries, thankfully didn't have plaque in the arteries, but he was headed that way. And if you don't know about it, it's just going to continue to grow over the next decade. And the inflammation gets more and more intense. And I tell my patients, think of that last slide that I just revealed as a volcano waiting to erupt. And just like a real volcano, it gets hot inside. That's the inflammation. And if it bursts through that inner lining, that's something called plaque rupture. That's what happened to the 40-year-old radiologist 30 years ago, to the nurse's dad, to the head of the American Heart Association, on and on and on. Plaque rupture. And guess what? That takes a minute or two. You go from I'm fine to, oh my gosh, I'm dying, or I just dropped dead. Sudden death is so half of all people that have arterial disease present with either a heart attack or sudden death as their first symptom. That's why you can pass a stress test. If the plaque hadn't ruptured, you don't have an event. Once that plaque ruptures, then the body has to form a scab over it to try to heal it, just like a real cut. And that scab we call a clot. And if that clot grows big enough, then all of a sudden that clot's filled up the artery, shuts down the highway, and whatever cells are downstream from that start to die. That sounds pretty scary, right? I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, do I have that? Well, I'm not intending to frighten you. You'll leave here with information on what to do about this. But let me tell you one other piece of the story. So I just talked about what causes most heart attacks and strokes. Well, what about dementia? So not all dementia follows what I'm about to tell you, but the majority of dementia is not Alzheimer's disease. Yes, Alzheimer's disease is real. Absolutely. I'm pretty sure they're going to tie oxidative stress into that. There's a lot of good science that says that, yes, that's the case. I can't say that yet. I don't have that evidence, but that's probably true. What I do know is most plaque rupture happens when the artery is not really very narrow, just like in this picture. But it can still get plaque rupture, and you'll still have a clot grow on top of that. But the clot's not big enough to block off the artery. The artery's still carrying blood. You don't even feel this one. It's zero symptoms because it didn't interrupt blood flow. But think about when you've ever cut yourself. How fragile is that fresh scab? If you bump it, what happens? It falls off. Guess what? If blood's rushing over a fresh clot, it peels off microscopic pieces of clot that travel down to those hair-sized blood vessels. And those hair-sized blood vessels are nourishing just a tiny nest of cells. Ed, you'll never miss those 10 brain cells that just died. Don't worry about it. Cindy, you'll never miss those heart cells that just gave up the ghost, because it's imperceptible until it isn't, right? That accumulation of recurrent silent plaque rupture is a preventable cause of the most common reason for dementia. Has anybody ever heard the phrase vascular dementia? Raise your hand if you've heard that phrase. Okay, not everybody has. Well, that's a real thing, and it's more people have dementia from that than Alzheimer's. As scary as Alzheimer's is, I'm not saying it ain't scary. So it takes plaque and inflammation, and we get plaque rupture, and that clot is what kills people or damages them, either suddenly or gradually. So again, enough with frightening me, Dr. Wright. Let's get to the good news here. So here's some good news. This is reversible. If you stop trapping the cholesterol, if you stop the oxidative stress, healing can actually take place. And we can prevent plaque rupture, and we can prevent plaque from continuing to grow. It's not inevitable. It's not destiny. So how do we do this? Well, I've already told you. It's oxidative stress. Find out each person's oxidative stress drivers, and we stop making the sticky stuff, and you can heal. Inflammation is king in my office. That's the first thing I want to know about on my patients when I first see them. It's the first thing I want to know on follow-up visits. Because if their inflammation is not under control, I haven't figured out what to do. I haven't yet designed a plan that stopped their oxidative stress. So there's some tests, and these are abbreviations for blood tests and some urine tests, that I promise you, if you haven't seen me, I don't know of anybody else in the city that's doing this. These are some other tests that just aren't part of the routine. I call these smoke detectors because just like a real fire, smoke precedes fire, right? It's got to get smoldering, it's got to get geared up before the fire erupts. And these two are what I call fire alarms. If either of these is high, that volcano is hot. I can't predict what day you're going to have a plaque rupture, and I can't predict which artery you're going to have a plaque rupture in, but I can tell you it's happening. It's in your near future. So let's do something about that. And then there's another test that usually is only tested in the emergency room when you're in the throes of a heart attack, this thing called troponin. If any of you have ever gone to the ER with friends or family or yourself, you've probably heard about a troponin test. Well, I use a much more sensitive detection of troponin to tell me, is my patient's heart cell healthy? Because if those cells aren't healthy, that means that they're also being damaged by oxidative stress. We've got to address all of those things. So we can't cover everything, but I do want to give you some tips. First of all, there are lots of risk factors that you can start to change. You need to consider changing them. The one in the upper left, all the different ways that a person can get nicotine, they've expanded greatly in my career. You know what? We only knew about cigarettes, right? But it's any nicotine is a deal breaker when it comes to your health because it causes oxidative stress. It doesn't have to be smoked. It can be in the gum. It can be in the patch. It can be anyway. Dental care, what you're putting on your fork, what your blood pressure is, on and on. So what are some principles of creating health? And we've touched on these. Nutrition, finding out what's right for you. And there isn't a single diet. Yes, Mediterranean's a great diet. Yes, this is a great diet. There's not one for everybody. Learning what your needs are is critical. How much should I move? is my oral health really good? Let me tell you a secret that I've learned over the last several years in working with dentists. Dentists weren't trained on how to prevent heart attacks and strokes, right? Why would they know about that? Well, guess what? Some really visionary dentists, some of whom are in the state of Tennessee, have been on the hunt because they realize, you know what, my patients that had the unhealthiest gums had the most health problems. There's a connection. Absolutely there is. And there are a handful of bacteria that actually can be in your mouth, and your gums may look fine, but if these bacteria are there, they're going to cause damage. So guess what? Eating any food creates oxidative stress. So, Dr. Wright, I'm not allowed to eat? Well, no, that's not what I said. I just said that causes oxidative stress. So when you're burning that fuel, you're creating the equivalent of what's coming out of those smokestacks. Well, the wonderful thing is, our bodies were designed with ways to counteract oxidative stress. Our body actually makes two of the most powerful antioxidants known to man. The problem is they have a finite capacity to absorb that oxidative stress. So when you overwhelm your body's ability to do that, then you don't have any protection and the oxidative stress runs wild. So what's on your fork will drive that. General principle is eat a rainbow of foods. If everything on your plate is the same color, you're headed for problems. It's got to be different colors. Foods have different things in, and today's not a nutrition lecture, but there are all sorts of nutrients that are necessary. Mediterranean diet is often a great starting point, and there are all sorts of things, and it looks really complicated, and I've had patients say, well, you know, I really enjoy eating, you know, I want to eat foods that I can enjoy. And I'll show them this picture. It's like, you think any of these foods are flavorful? Think you'd enjoy those? Yeah, just because it's healthy doesn't mean it has to taste like cardboard, folks. It really doesn't. When do you eat? We have a company out there that has been advertising the fourth meal. Stop by and get your fourth meal of the day on your way home. Oh my goodness. Well, and my experience is, and I used to be one of these, so I know from my experience, it's pretty easy to have that fourth meal without driving anywhere. Ice cream used to be one of my go-to things at night, man. And occasionally it is now, but it's not all the time. Well, it turns out that if we're eating from the time we get up until the time we go to bed, the hours between that last meal and the first meal aren't enough for your body to recover from burning fuel all day long. So this idea of intermittent fasting, during that time that you're not eating, the body actually has all sorts of wonderful chemical pathways that get turned on and repair, restore, rejuvenate from the inside out on a cell. There ain't ever going to be a drug that does that. Your body is designed to do that. In fact, it helps the brain stay healthier. It reduces inflammation. All sorts of things. Now, not everybody should be an intermittent faster. So if you're pregnant, if you're nursing, if you've got cancer that's under treatment, there are some reasons that you shouldn't do intermittent fasting. But it's rare that it's not a potential benefit for you. And you get to decide your daily dose. If you decide to incorporate this as part of your health creation routine, just know that it takes 8 hours from the last calorie before any benefit happens. And then every hour after that, you're getting a dose of health and it peaks out somewhere between 14 and 16 hours. So we don't want you going past 16 hours between meals. That's not a good thing. That creates its own problems. And if you can get at least 12, that's a start. But if you can work towards 13 or 14 hours, again, you need to talk to your physicians about that. But pretty much everybody in this room probably would be a candidate for that from a health standpoint, safety standpoint. And you do need to drink fluids during that fasting time. We don't want you getting dehydrated. So what you eat, when you eat, what times you're eating. I didn't put on there portion size, but how much fuel are you putting in is another part of that. Burning fuel is a problem. So the bigger amount of fuel, the more problems. Most people spend most of their time just like this couple in the picture. In fact, I hate to tell you, here's some more fear-mongering by Dr. Wright. I'm the only one, well, there's a couple in the back. There's 4 people in the back, and I are the only ones getting healthier during this talk. Everybody else is sitting down. And it hadn't been quite an hour yet. We're coming up on an hour. But for every hour you sit, you're getting unhealthier because of oxidative stress. Exercise might be a dirty word in some people's mind. They think it's got to be, to exhaustion. It doesn't. All movement is medicine. And pick the things that you enjoy. Whether it's a chair class, whether it's a water aerobics class, whether it's a dance class. If you want to run half marathons, I'll run with you. I ain't very fast. But if you like to run, that's fine. Getting out of your chair, whether it's at work or at home, every hour for 2 or 3 minutes undoes the adverse effect of sitting. So we call that the 3 and 60. If I'm at my desk for an hour, I stand up. And you want to get some movement that gets your heart beating a little bit faster for at least 20 minutes every single day. This is a 7-day-a-week health creation program. I didn't say 60 minutes. I didn't say 2 hours. 20 minutes. And guess what? It can be 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. It doesn't have to be continuous. Strength training is important. It doesn't have to be lifting weights. You can do something called planking, which is like the push-up position, but you're not doing a push-up, and you're just making all your muscles stiff. So a variety of movement choices throughout the day. This is a real billboard on the way in Kentucky. I didn't take the picture, but outside of Bowling Green. Gum disease can kill more than a smile. That's the dentist advertising, and then right by it is the, tobacco. This is a real picture. So yeah, but gum disease can kill you, and nicotine too. 80% of you all have some form of gum disease, unless you're under the care of a dentist that understands this idea of the bacteria in the mouth or the problem. And again, not all dentists have been trained in that. These are the 5 bacteria. You don't need to write this down, but there are 5 bacteria that we know are a problem. And the one called PG also causes dementia. Bacteria in the mouth, through a different mechanism, can cause brain cell death that leads to dementia. This picture is showing how you actually should be getting what are called the pockets around your teeth measured. You ought to have this little probe that gets all the way around and checks how deep it is, because these bad guys live down in the bottom of that pocket, and whether or not it bleeds when they just barely touch your gums. If you've been spitting blood during a dental exam, that ain't normal. It's not because of their exam, it's because of your gums, I promise you. So what are some things I can do for my oral health? Is stop using nicotine, stop using alcohol rinses in your mouth. It's better for your toothbrush to be in that alcohol rinse and kill those bacteria. Starchy food, man, these bacteria love starchy foods and sugary foods. And then you really have to have a protocol of, follow your dental protocol, but it's not just brushing, it's not just flossing, you got to do some other things. So I'm pushing our time a little bit. If you need to leave, you won't hurt my feelings, but we're almost done, and I do want to answer questions. I get asked a lot, well, Dr. Wright, which supplement should I take? Well, that's a $60 billion business and growing. And I promise you, most of that is $60 billion of expensive urine, because your body doesn't need most of those things. But there are some. But do you want a medicine cabinet full of bottles, even if they're supplements? Or how about healthy food in your fridge? Most of the supplements that we really need are the things that are in the fruits and vegetables that we're not eating enough of. So supplements can't replace the benefit of eating the right foods, but there are some areas that I talk to my patients about supplementing, things like fiber. If a lot of people don't get enough fiber in their diet, and taking a fiber supplement is wonderful. Dark chocolate is a wonderful anti-inflammatory, antioxidant source that you can enjoy. Now we're talking a little bitty bit, okay? It's like one of those Dove chocolates. It's not the whole bar, folks. Vitamin D, most people that in my practice, 90% of the people need a vitamin D supplement. The problem is, so it's called the sunshine vitamin for a reason. Sunshine is what makes us. But the problem is we live indoors most of the time. And weekend exposure just isn't enough. And then getting enough fish, but it's hard to eat fish every day, so there is a right time and a right place for fish oil. Again, I'm not prescribing anything to you. I'm giving you some things to think about and things to discuss with your physician. What about prescriptions? We're not going to go into detail on that, but I already said this earlier on. It's the right drug, right drug for the right, in the right dose for the right reason. So yes, do I write prescriptions? Do I use statin drugs? Yes, and the right person for the right reason. I'll give you a hint. The main reason I use a statin drug is not because of their cholesterol level. What do you think it is? Inflammation, thank you. Statins are wonderful anti-inflammatory drugs. Pretty quickly, they put the fire out. Pretty quickly. So how can you get started on more than just, hey, Dr. Wright gave me some ideas, but what do I do? What am I supposed to do? First of all, I don't have any, I'm not a salesman of books, but these two books that are on the screen, if you're at all interested in what I talked about tonight, are must-reads. Written by two of my mentors that I've learned over the last more than decade about this whole process. It'll tell you which test should you be doing. What does the test mean? And on and on. So let's get more accurate information. Can my current provider order these tests? Well, it's a qualified maybe. Can he? Sure. Will he is the other question. So let me give you a secret about us doctors. We like to be confident and competent about what we're managing. If you ask me to order a test I've never ordered, to test something that I've never understood that this test is even tied to it, let alone now what do I do with the result if it's abnormal, they're just not going to do it. It's not their fault. Please don't misunderstand. It's not their fault. That's the reality. So, I mean, you ought to have a conversation with your doctor. Hey, I'd like to create better health, and do you have some ideas for me on my nutrition? And what about this intermittent fasting thing and so on? So absolutely. So there are some other options. So Larry talked about my practice. Concierge, direct pay, I've got out of the insurance world several years ago because I wasn't going to let them tell me what I could do and what tests I can do and what medicines I can order and so on. And as he said, I do extended visits. It takes time to figure all of this stuff out, and we have health coaching. We have a program. Here's the problem. My waiting list is 12 months. I would love to see everybody that raises their hand, not just in this room, but elsewhere. And I mean, you're welcome to go to our website and contact us and let us know. But honestly, it's 12-month wait. Well, when I moved here 45 years ago, I had hair. And what I had wasn't gray, so you know that I can't be doing this forever. My wife will tell you, I don't know when he's going to retire. He's having too much fun, and that's a true statement. But I'll just say it this way. God called me to try to do something more. Try to get more people the right information. We've got technology, we've got ways to get information anywhere in the world pretty much. So here are some other options. The first one that I helped to develop and wrote the education for is called My Health Plan. It's an app that's free. And if you will write down myhealthplan.io, if you're interested, that'll take you, and do that on your smartphone. So you use the web, go to that site, and then you can download, whether you're an Apple or an Android, the app. But what this app will do for you is you'll answer about a dozen questions, and then it will give you some risk assessment evaluation. It doesn't make a diagnosis. Apps don't make diagnoses, doctors do. It'll make some more personalized lifestyle recommendations based upon your answers. And it will let you order some of these tests yourself. Pretty cool. So that's an option. And then once you get the tests back, they come through the app. And then again, I've written the program that helps to evaluate that. And you get a new risk assessment. Oh, now that you've done this test, we know A, B, C, and D about you. And because of that, we now know we need to change your lifestyle a little bit. Again, it's not treating you, it's making recommendations. It also tells you how to have a conversation with my doctor when I get some of these tests back. How do I start that conversation? Because here's the other thing. Don't walk into your doctor's office with a fistful of test results. Right? He's got 3 other rooms that are waiting for him, right? You don't want to ruin his day. But if you say, doc, I'm really getting interested in better health, and I'm getting some inflammation tests, and can you help me with any of that? And again, there's some other questions in there because I know what the pushback is. So you need to know how to navigate that conversation. But you order the tests, you pay for them online, it's all seamless. And then, as I was saying, you get interpretation of the results. That's an easy thing to start. Do it tonight. Just answer the questions. Don't do anything else but answer the 12 questions. It takes you about 45 seconds to answer, and start getting some info. But guess what? I said that the app doesn't make a diagnosis. The app really isn't treating anybody. So it's a step in the right direction. It's a step to get you more information. We need more David Wrights in the country, and there are some. They're scattered around out there, but I'm the only one in Memphis. There's a couple of them over in Nashville. There's a few in East Tennessee. I go to a national meeting of people that know everything that's in these books. And we never have more than 100 doctors at that. We got a big country, right? So Renew Health, we started a year ago, is telemedicine. Anybody in the 50 states can get access to this. It's an annual membership that covers all of the costs for that program. It has health coaching. You get everything as if you were sitting down with me, but it's virtual. And we have education. So we have a platform. And so if you go to renewhealth.us, you can learn more about what are these different packages, what's the cost, and if you're interested, you can, again, contact. There's a button that you can say, you know, I want to learn more. So we're trying to get this information out. I've been training other providers in how to do this. But until the demand is there, meaning people like you that demand the best science, the best recommendations, the best testing, until enough of you do that, why would anybody want to start a company? Well, that's an act of faith on my part. I believe that once people know what's possible, that they're going to want to go further with it. So action steps, if you don't do anything else, get somebody to measure inflammation, start figuring out what your root causes are, get an expert to help you stop that oxidative stress, because it isn't the number of years in your life, right? It's the amount of life in your years. So with that, Larry, I'll let you lead off the Q&A.